Hello, welcome to the Holistic Healer Podcast, a podcast dedicated to all things holistic. I am your host, Cheryl Lee. Today, Wade Lightheart is back for part 2. Wade is the co-founder of Biooptimzers. He is a 3-time natural bodybuilding champion and Mr. Universe competitor, all while being vegetarian. He is an author and high-performance coach. We sit down today to discuss Wade's new book, The Ultimate Nutrition Bible. We talk about why most diets fail and why every diet works for a while, genetic testing, goals, hormones, and so much more. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Holistic Healer Podcast. I'm your host, Cheryl Lee. And today I have back on for part 2, Wade Lightheart. He was on not too long ago, and we're going to get into some amazing things. He's got a brand new book out. And for those of you who don't know, he is the co-founder and president of Biooptimzers. He is the host of the Awesome Health podcast, a 3-time Canadian all-natural bodybuilding champion and former Mr. Universe competitor, all while being vegetarian. He is an advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute, has studied exercise, physiology, and nutrition, and is an author, high-performance coach, and embodies a holistic lifestyle. And he has a brand new book out called The Ultimate Nutrition Bible with his partner, Matt Gallant. And we're going to talk about that today, among some other things that we didn't have a chance to get into last time. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here again. So looking forward to getting fun topics.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. So you've got this new book out. So can you just what was the impetus for writing this book? Because it is literally a Bible. I mean, it is thick.
This is a book, folks. It's a textbook, and it's designed as a reference guide. So I would say, long time ago, when I was a young boy, I discovered Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding.
Okay.
Which was a similar style book, which encompassed all aspects and facets of bodybuilding to that point, from its early origins to where it was when Arnold finished his career, essentially. So it was a composition of all of that knowledge into one book and became a foundational component for the bodybuilding community. And that, my original aspect in bodybuilding, gave birth to my interest in nutrition and exercise physiology, and then the industries that have ensued out of the nutrition industry, health industry, the personal training industry. And now I'm in the manufacturing and supplement business, and then all of the marketing and education points. We started out as an education company, actually, my company. We're using supplements to actually fund a health company. So supplements are a branch of Biooptimzers.
Gotcha.
We create world-beating products through our research and development team, which is superior to most forms, in order to support people living longer and stronger. And one of the things that I've noted over the course of my 35 years in the industry is what I call the rise and fall of dietary tribalism and dietary cults. So anybody that gets into diet, there's some sort of outcome that they're seeking. They want to lose weight. They want to build muscle. They want to overcome a debilitating condition, recover from an illness, or avoid one, or live longer. There's always a goal in mind.
Yeah.
And when one doesn't know how to do that, one comes to the realization, well, I don't know what's going on, and I need to find out. And so you go onto the internet and you do a search. And invariably, you'll come up against some charismatic figure who you identify with and say, well, that makes sense. They sound just like me, or they've had some of the same problems, and therefore I should listen to them as an authority of how they solve that. Now, the likelihood that that's true is really suspect. And if you understand bell curve distribution or standard deviation of any study, that in any group dynamics of demographics between people, you have a bell curve. And at the top of the bell curve is 2%, and at the bottom of the bell curve is about 2%.
Gotcha.
And these are the extremes of the bell curve. So when you see, so-and-so, your favorite influential person, charismatic figure that says, I did the carnivore diet, and I had tried all these diets before, and I lost all this weight, and I had all these metabolic issues, and I went totally on the lion diet, is one of the ones that are really popular thanks to its effectiveness for Jordan Peterson and his daughter Michaela. It's been because they had a severe medical condition that was debilitating for them, and this diet answered the problems that they were experiencing, and therefore a whole lot of people are coming into it that don't have those genetic conditions, but may have some things and are extracting some benefits out of some sort of restrictive mindset and some sort of discipline around a diet, which is an improvement overall, which will give them some results for some. I'm not advocating that diet. I'm just saying this is a tendency.
Yeah.
And then the problems of that diet will expose themselves because, as Peterson talks about, he's like, I'm not a diet expert and I don't recommend this. It's just what I've been able to do. And then he's also engaging in a bunch of mitigation strategies, which they're talking a little bit about now, him and Michaela, and, other things that to offset some of the liabilities of that diet. And I've seen this over and over. I remember back in the raw food days, I remember the vegetarian diet. I remember the keto stuff. I remember, the zone diet and the paleo diet. I can go back in the rise and fall. And all of these have the seer things. A new way of doing things, a charismatic figure, a little twist on something that was old, a bunch of principles, diets, products, services, companies, industries that build out events, books, courses, videos, all that from each one of those. And the reality is we start the book and we say, well, all diets work for a while.
Yes.
Until they don't. And the problem is our little amygdala and our desire for tribalistic identification, and that's controlled by your serotonin system of where we are in the dominance hierarchy relative to a group. And this is well proven out in Peterson's work. And it's something is in all biological realities, why women want to be as attractive as possible and men want to be as successful as possible, because those create these neurochemical responses that we self-identify and observe in order to repropagate the species over time. That's the undercurrent. And they do the same thing around diet, because it's what we hope the diet is going to bring us to move us up that perception in the world for ourselves and the others. And it's really hard to get out of that. And the thing is there are positive and negative components to every diet, or optimal and suboptimal components. Sure. And then everybody goes, well, everybody's different. How many times have you heard that?
Yeah. Too many times.
Well, it's kind of the checkout of maybe a conflict in dietary philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's not a conflict. It's a misunderstanding, because we're only operating from a partial awareness of the nuances. And part of the nuances is your own individual genetics, your own psychological and emotional needs, your spiritual needs, and how those compose your ability to adhere to any dietary philosophy, the preferences that you're going to have, and then how do you optimize for your unique characteristics. So we decided to create a completely unbiased, essentially encyclopedia that allows you to systematically address your unique individual needs, to understand those uniques without getting caught that I'm a keto or a carnivore or a vegetarian. So let's drop the labels and let's get into removing those so that you don't get hooked in this forever. So the idea is it's a psychological defense book for any propagation of a dietary philosophy that is suboptimal for you. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn from all the different things. I've learned from Matt, my business partner, is a keto guy, and he's learned from me as a vegetarian. So, so we see the benefits of collaboration, and we wanted to share those insights with the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you I think maybe at the very beginning of the book, you talk about why is it that most diets always fail? Is it because of what you were just talking about, basically trying to fit into a certain narrative? And then we're going to get into the genetic component of what our genetics can tell us in terms of what the best diet is. But would you say that would be kind of at the forefront of why a lot of diets fail, is because maybe we're choosing the wrong diet for what our genetics would be the most complementary thing for us to do in that sense?
So that's one of the primary reasons. So for example, I'll give you some some references in myself. So first off, we weren't able to account for genetic variability until very recently.
Right.
Okay, so that's a new development. And we thought that genetics was going to fix everything. And then we discovered we can actually turn off and on our genes through nutrigenomics. In other words, by taking some things, you'll turn off suboptimal genes. And by taking other things, you'll turn on optimal gene expression. Yeah. We cover that a little bit. We touch on those subjects at the end of the book because it does get complex and you are going to need an expert to determine that. But your genetics will determine. So I'll give you an example of my own stuff. So I have suboptimal genetics for cardiovascular disease, double negative on that one. And I have suboptimal genetics on blood sugar regulation and on food satiety and on suboptimal genetics on detoxification. Okay. So now that I understand those parameters, so a bodybuilding diet, let's say, of high protein, low fat, moderate carbohydrates would keep me looking good and probably feeling pretty good. So I would look fit, I would look healthy, I'd look developed. So I have that cosmetic appeal and my blood sugar be relatively stable. And then sometimes around my 80s, like late 70s and 80s, I would die of a cardiovascular event of either a stroke or a heart disease. That's pretty much the program.
Okay.
So plant-based diets are really good for cardiovascular outcomes.
Okay.
So by incorporating a plant-based diet, I reduce my potential for activating those suboptimal genes. Okay. And there's lots of research around that, the fiber content, et cetera, whatever, low cholesterol levels of triglycerides are pretty, cholesterol's not as a required thing. Triglycerides is probably the biggest part. So yeah, but now we got a problem. So here's the unidentified problem on a plant-based diet. Well, how am I going to be able to have enough protein in my diet from a plant-based diet because we don't have as much amino acids, and we don't need protein. We actually need amino acids. Right. We get amino acids from protein, but the problem with a lot of plant-based diets is they're suboptimal for that. So what happens is if I don't eat enough protein, I'm going to not feel as satiated, and my likelihood to gravitate towards simple, refined carbohydrates on a plant-based diet is going to be quite high. And that's going to be dysregulatory for my blood sugar gene. And so I'm going to get fat really easy and feel hungry all the time. Okay, so how do I offset that? Well, I have to have sufficient amounts of protein in my diet. So I have to take my plant-based proteins, which I augment my diet through regularly on my diet. So I get enough protein in my diet. I optimize my digestion so that I'm able to extract maximal amino acids out of my what I would say a moderate protein diet. And I supplement my diet with critical essential fatty acids, which may be deficient in my plant-based diet. So that I use fiber as my way to offset my satiety limitations because I don't feel full soon enough with my genes. Okay, so by doing those things, now I've regulated my blood sugar to a point that it looks like I'm on a ketogenic diet all the time on my blood sugar analysis, like HOMA-IR, continuous glucose monitors. I get sufficient amount of protein, enough that I can compete at, world championships at 50 years old without any kind of hormone replacement or anything else. My cardiovascular profile says through the testing that the likelihood of me having a cardiac event is extremely low. And so by understanding these things, I've taken a plant-based approach bolstered by very specific supplements for me. And then on the detoxification side, which is my last piece, I have a biohacking machine that does ozone and capsules and sauna and steam. So I'm adding elements that helps my detoxification pathways work so that I can keep toxins from building up in my system. So basically, using everything that I've identified in these points in the book, I'm able to address all of my suboptimal points and enhance all my optimal points because I've got some good qualities and stuff like that. Like I make, and so I take advantage of those things. So my goal is, and Matt's goal, and him and I are completely different in how our genetics are going. Completely different. And so he's had to do the same thing. So we created a reference guide so the individual can say, oh, I'm really interested in living longer, or I'm really interested in building muscle, or I'm really interested in losing body fat, or I'm interested in really cognitive health and removing the chance or lowering the chance of, Alzheimer's or mental health conditions or cognitive decline. Well, now I can go in there and apply a strategy now to set me up to win in 20 years of time. And I can stay flexible enough that if something changes in the future, I can make an adjustment in real time so that I can get the outcome that I want, because I'm not identified as I need to be this guy or this girl.
Right. Right. So that's interesting. So because you've been a vegetarian for like how many years now?
This will be my 23rd year.
23rd year. So, but when was your first genetic test to?
Just only a few years ago.
A few years ago. So
Yeah.
on the opposite side of that, with your partner, Matt, who's a keto guy, did his genetic testing basically support his keto diet before he had even had that genetic testing? Likewise, you, the plant-based, in support of that?
Partially.
Okay.
So we were only both of us were operating with maybe 60 to 70% of the equation through trial and error. In other words, we were running our own experiments and using biofeedback or technology, whether everything from continuous glucose monitors, which were relatively new, gut biome tests, hormone tests, all these things. And we were continually running into challenges. But we're in the industry, so we're dedicating our whole life, our whole resources, everything that we have. So yeah, great for us, but where does that leave, the person with business responsibilities and family responsibilities and, some sort of like, they're screwed. They don't have the time. Yeah, they really are. And I feel so much empathy and compassion for these individuals. And it drives our whole etymology. I don't need more money. I don't need to be doing what I'm doing. I'm fine in life. I could walk away tomorrow and live a beautiful life without any of this. But the empathy and compassion I have for so many people who are struggling. The average person that starts diet goes on 6 different diets over the course of a lifetime. 97% of those people are going to fail. People who weight loss being one of them. The correlative diseases associated with being obese and suboptimal and eating all these things, cardiovascular disease, cancer, blood sugar, cognitive decline, death through medical intervention. All of these things are because it's not that we have lack of information. It's that we have a lack ability to discern the information that's appropriate for the individual. So Matt and I took it upon ourselves to let's do this for everybody that we can out of empathy and compassion, because I know how difficult those struggles are. I've coached over 15,000 people personally.
Wow.
And so I've been versed with all of the uniqueness of those struggles. And now the good news is, here's the great news. Today, everybody can get access to a few key tests so they know themselves and know the members of their family and can course correct. And you can make almost any diet work for you. Yeah. If you use the proper supplementation and the proper, say, maybe technology, like whether it's saunas or cold plunges or et cetera, all the biohacking stuff, in addition to whatever diet. It might not be the perfect diet for you, but you can counter that because that's just the diet that you like and you can stick to.
Sure. So to get the biggest bang out of the book, would it be like a really good idea to invest in a genetic test?
Yes.
To really, okay.
100%. And we're actually looking at creating a composite of the genetic tests that are out there. Each test has certain strength of it. So let me explain testing for people.
Yeah, please.
When you take a genetic test, there's the genetic test, but when it gives you its readouts, they're using data set points based on large databases of individuals who they're putting a set of parameters, and those parameters are not absolutes. They're a set of, and they're developed out of the focus of the people who did the genetic test. So if someone's a genetic test for athletic dominance versus cardiovascular disease versus blood sugar versus longevity, all of those algorithms and data points are going to have variances that you're going to make conclusions from, but we have to understand that those are models, those are not absolutes.
Okay.
And that's so and each test, it's like microbiome tests. Each test has some good parts and some down parts, and there's and the technology is developed. I think in 5 to 10 years, this will mostly be worked out
Yeah.
to
Do
an
you
end
have
result.
a test that you recommend that you found to be like maybe not the best, but maybe a good
Yeah, I
general?
think the DNA company does a pretty good job.
Okay.
They're an I like their interpretation program for, I think, for the layperson, I think is very good.
Okay.
I think if you're
Okay.
working with a naturopathic doctor, which I do suggest people do,
Okay.
I think that naturopathic doctor can probably do an interview with you, and they will select a genetic test that's most relevant to your goals. As an
Okay.
all-encompassing, right now, I think the DNA company's good. There's some other
Okay.
ones out there, and most of them are still really good. Like, I don't
Okay.
want to disparage anyone. If there's one that
Of
you like,
course.
go do it. And the information that you garner from that will just open up a bunch of ahas and confirmations and awareness
Okay.
that are so worth it. They're so worth the investment.
Yeah, for sure. And so for those people who say they get this genetic test and it comes out that they are best suited for the most part to like maybe a paleo type diet,
Yeah.
but for their own spiritual reasons or just because of their own ethics, they want to be on a plant-based diet. Does this book address that gap
Yeah, it
between
does.
those two? Okay,
It does. In
cool.
fact, we one of the chapters we have the hierarchy of nutritional decisions,
Okay.
and spiritual beliefs are one of the foundational components in the entire perspective. And nobody talks about this. So,
Yeah,
for
right.
example, if I have more of a Hindu base, let's say, where I don't want to consume sentient animals,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I don't want to take on animal products, then that trumps everything right off the bat. If I'm
Right.
a Muslim, a devout Muslim, and I want to have my 40 days of Ramadan, but I have suboptimal genes for fasting, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Like, that's more important to me. And the various faiths have certain, do's and don'ts around diets and
Right.
practices.
Mhm.
And so we want to be able to honor each other's faiths, and then to be able to accommodate, even if it's suboptimal for you from that perspective, to do that. And then we get into, you know, uh, values and adherence. So
Mm.
so there's spirituality and then your own internal values. And
Yeah.
there's sometimes there is a crossover between those two, and sometimes they're independent of each other.
Yes.
And so, and those are some of the most extreme situations that people will find themselves. Maybe, for example, they're a devout vegan or vegetarian for spiritual reasons, and they have a child that becomes diagnosed with a specific condition that could be alleviated by the consumption of animal proteins. And so now you're at this kind of spiritual
Yeah.
conflict that emerges. And this happens lots,
Yeah. I could
you
imagine it
know,
does.
and more often than people want to convey. And what happens if you're hyper dogmatic within that belief, then you have to choose between the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And this gets into deep philosophical and value assessments. And invariably, everyone I'm using an extreme condition here, but anyone that
Right.
has overly identified with a particularly dietary strategy
Hmm.
is going to have a collision course in their life with that. And I find oftentimes it can disrupt some of the primary things for health and longevity and quality of life. And that is, these things can disrupt marriages. They can
Yeah.
disrupt relationship with kids or family members or community members. And those things, if you look at the longevity studies and health studies, may actually be more impactful than diet alone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we wanted to
Just,
identify those things inside of the book as well.
yeah. Okay. That's amazing. So I just wanted to ask you this. So I watched an interview with you and Matt. You were on Dave Asprey's podcast.
Yes.
And I know Dave is he's totally down on like the raw food diet and he's totally down. Just really, I feel like vegetarianism just in general. And I know there was a little joke made between like, who's going to go to the grave first? We'll see.
Yeah. Right.
Something to that effect, right? There's going to be a competition and we'll see at the end of life who makes
Right.
it. But my question is, when we look at the centenarians or the blue zones, I'm for not all of them, but for the most part, a lot of them are on a plant-based diet. And I know there's a lot more that goes into a centenarian, the community and their purpose for life and all of these things. But is the fact that they are succeeding on a plant-based diet, is that partly due to the genetic component of, the area that they potentially are in? Or is it really those other factors? Because I don't ever really hear him talking a lot about the centenarians and the blue zones and the fact that a lot of them are on a plant-based diet and succeeding on that diet.
Correct. I would, and part of the reason that I made the offhanded comment when he suggested that I was going to call, first off, the statements that Dave made towards I was going to develop all these stones and the phytic acid stuff. Those are absolute, extremely low resolution, and I would say fallacious conclusions or projections onto me. And that's why I responded in the way I did. I tried to be as respectful as possible.
Yeah, I love that.
But the reality is, Dave has built a brand based on a dietary philosophy, and that dietary philosophy includes the excessive use of pharmaceutical and technological instruments to augment the suboptimal aspects. He also is using hormone therapy in order to bolster stuff. He's using a variety of agents that I don't have access, or I choose not to incorporate.
He
has a lot of resources over and above most consumers that he's using other technologies to deal with the suboptimal aspects of his diets while advocating the diet. So how much is the diet and how much is the other things that you're doing? And I think that distortion is not uncommon amongst the diet gurus. They're not telling you the whole picture. Now, to Dave's credit, he is revealing all these other things, but then he's over calibrating for his diet strategy or his exercise strategy, which any credible exercise scientist or dietary meta-analysis would punch serious holes in what he's promoting and suggesting. And recently he's been under a tremendous amount of pushback against what he's been advocating. And, great for Dave. He's done a great service to the world. I'm not here to tear apart the guy or what he's trying to do. I think that he was in a very compromised situation in his life, and he figured a way out of it in a unique way, and he's promoted that to a lot of people and helped a lot of people. Good for you.
Yeah, for sure.
But we have to take all that with a grain of salt. And I just recently published the results of a meta-analysis of just under 1.4 million people through 14 different studies that were illustrating the what I call the fiber factor, the ultimate fiber factor. And I have a theory which would support what you're suggesting. And I published this on my Facebook page. If you want to go there, you can check it out. Or in our bio tribe where I answer specific questions on Biooptimzers. So it turned out in this meta-analysis that there were 4 different types of fiber, which suggested it would extend life by the consumption of this on a regular basis by 12 to 35% life extension. So to put that in perspective, if your life expectancy is 80 years old, on the low end, that would take you to 89. And on the high end, that would take you to about 108.
Wow.
So almost 3 decades on the plus side. And so I created what I called the ultimate fiber formula.
Okay.
And and why I think that's effective is because I believe that we live, this is not, I know this to be true. We live in a symbiotic relationship with our bacteria. We actually feed the bacteria and they feed us. They build the building blocks, they build the energy units, and they produce a variety of, polyphenols and antioxidants and all these things that are essential to life as we know it. And it's not discussed much. And the reason that I know this is we have a microbiology lab in Bosnia run by PhDs and master students that were running nonstop experiments. And I see what's happening in this.
Yeah, right.
So fiber happens to be one of the things that feeds our bacteria cultures. And so what we found is that, there are actually a bunch of different types of fiber. And these types of fibers have effects. So I'll give you a quick lowdown on this for our listeners here for your podcast. This is bleeding edge stuff.
Okay.
You would want 4 grams of legume fibers.
Okay.
About 7.5 grams of vegetable fibers, 3.5 grams of cereal fiber, and 4 grams of food fiber. So legume fiber was a 12% reduction in all causes of mortality. Vegetable fiber, 35%. Cereal fiber, 22%. And fruit fiber, 4 grams. So I went and said, well, you know what? You could do a simple calculation. And I'm going to expand on this on a future thing. I just give you like, so for example, if a person had a cup of oats every day, a cup of strawberries, half a cup of chickpeas, and like 3 cups of broccoli.
Okay.
You would have all of those things going. Now, you could work those things into pretty much every diet out there, with the exception maybe the cereal fiber would be the one, and you could go to an ancient grain, or you could go something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
And I'm going to tweak those out for the different diets in future posts, because I think we've stumbled upon something that is part of that contribution.
Yeah.
So let's say that, let's be conservative and say that's a 12 to maybe 20% factor in age-related expectancy in life. And then you add the high oxygen environments and the low toxicity. And then you add the social value within that culture. And guess what? Now you have the combination of both diet, environment, and social that leads to a higher incident of supercentenarians than in other places. And I think it's not diet alone, but I do believe that there are psychological components that come with certain dietary elements that are unstated. I do know that hardcore raw vegans, and I was a hardcore raw vegan for 2 years, that don't eat sufficient protein do seem to be a little bit off. And I also noticed that like hardcore carnivores, in that they seem to be a little off. So there is something definitely disruptive in our mental state when you go too far to the extremes. And I'm an extreme guy. I've done all those kind of extreme things out of experimentation. Yes. And I think Dave's like that. I think Matt's like that. And I call it the Formula One formula.
Yeah,
Basically, Formula One race cars go around the track at 200 miles an hour, and these guys risk their lives. But the technology developed from doing that, you'd never drive like that, or even capable of driving that in your daily driver. A lot of that technology is now in your daily driver to make your life a lot safer and more effective.
Okay. I love that analogy. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Well, that's amazing. I can't wait to learn more about that. I know that there's been, I think it's Will Bolkowitz. He wrote the book Fiber Fueled. And he talks a lot about the microbiome and the importance of the fiber and how it's kind of like, top tier when it comes to like gut health and longevity. I wanted to also, one of the things that you also talk about in the book is setting goals and getting really clear on what your goals are. And we did touch a little bit last time on hormone therapy and the importance of hormones. And so where are you standing right now in terms of hormones, like being driven by the food that we choose to eat or the diet that we're on, as opposed to supplementing exogenously?
Yeah, this is a huge factor. So, in order to manufacture your hormones, you're going to have sufficient amounts of cholesterol and DHEA in order to produce the cascade of hormones inside of your body.
Right.
So genetically, you may, like, for example, I have super high levels of DHEA.
Okay.
But from a hormone representation side, I have suboptimal genes on my testosterone to estrogen ratio. So my body will tend to estrogenize over testosterone. Okay. So I have to be very meticulous on a plant-based diet to provide enough elements to create the cholesterol so that I don't go too estrogenic.
Got you.
Okay? Because that's just the way my body metabolizes. Now, there's benefits to that on a longevity perspective, but there's, from a cosmetic side of the equation, it's suboptimal. So I have to account for that. Someone else might be inverted to that. Maybe they don't produce enough DHEA, but they have you can live on cholesterol and do a high fat diet, and that works really well for them.
For them, yeah.
So it's because they have so much cholesterol production that really helps them keep their hormones. But at a certain point, you're going to hit the age wall.
Yeah.
And everything that was working before just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, everything stops working.
So what we think of, the age-related performance side, and you see this in athletics, and it shows up more for women earlier than men, in that there's a general decline through normal aging processes, which can be accelerated through environmental conditions, stress, toxicity, disruptions in health, diet, whatever,
right,
accidents, disease, all those things can create that. But even on a normal, healthy person without any eruptions, you're kind of declining. But there's like a tipping point that happens. And so for women in particular, that happens right around menopause. You start getting these premenopausal symptoms because you're having hormonal dysregulation. Now, that hormonal dysregulation is going to be accelerated or mitigated by the quality of your diet.
okay,
And what's really weird about this, the thing is the women who have the best hormonal profiles beforehand are more likely to experience the cliff syndrome because they had such a good hormone profile before. They could get away with a lot of things that weren't so great.
Yeah.
Until now they've got to pay the interest on those consequences. And for women who had maybe not so good hormonal profiles, they were already calibrating for those, hopefully working with a naturopathic doctor or professional to help them optimize that early on. So they were removing the more inflammatory components, and they were adding the things that would optimize their genetic profile. Okay. So oftentimes they actually do better than women who have great hormone. Like a lot of women, that kind of things worked out. Well, I was always skinny and everything looked good all of a sudden. And then one day I woke up and it was just like disaster zone. And I don't know what happened. And I've been through this collapse. And that's usually the ones with the best hormonal profiles because they've relied on it their whole lives, but they didn't know that they had that. It just was that way. Mm-hmm. So, and I think one of the strengths I've been fortunate with, I always say, I had lousy genetics for building muscle. I had lousy genetics for losing body fat. I those lousy genetics were actually good for me in the fact that I had to put a disproportionate amount of work early on in my career that led to conclusions that I wouldn't have come to if I had great genetics on that. Like I competed against a guy, he's a great guy, Kevin Weiss. Yeah, this guy has he's 50 years old and had a testosterone level of 1600, which looks like somebody that's on the saw, like using steroids or something. And he's not, he's just that way. You know, great athlete, great guy. And he was able to do things that were really remarkable that I would have blown up on. There's no way I would have, so.
So when it comes to using hormones in conjunction with the diet. So for example, for the people who are listening who are like over the 50 mark, say, who are starting to struggle with hormonal issues, a decline in their hormones, and they decide to use exogenous, like, either TRT or bioidentical hormones, something to that effect. For example, how can we, let's just use an example of a guy who wants to get shredded in his 50s.
Yeah.
And he's going to use TRT and he's going to get that way. How do we bridge the gap between the goal of someone who wants to get shredded, but also maybe having the foresight to understand that the goal for longevity and health span is going to come into effect? And how can we mitigate that so that we're not going to end up with the massive negative consequences, for example, of using the overuse of hormones for that moment in time with that goal, maybe using a protocol that's in the book, for example, but knowing that, hey, I know that I also have that longevity component as well.
Yes. So the great Thomas Sowell, I think Sowell, who is the great American philosopher, is in his 90s. He said
Okay.
something that I love and I live by it. There are no solutions to life. There are only trade-offs.
I love that too.
Okay. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but you can't have it at the same time in the same place.
Okay. Right.
So for example, when you're doing an analysis of, let's say this individual, let's say they're 20 pounds overweight,
Mm-hmm.
what's a healthy idea for their age group. They
Okay.
have a suboptimal testosterone level
Mm-hmm.
and they don't exercise enough. They don't have the motivation to get to the gym. You know, they don't have that
Mm-hmm.
drive because they're, you know, really on the low end of the testosterone level. Their partner's not responding to them. They're not getting sex very much,
Yeah.
you
Okay.
know, and they don't seem to have the drive to overcome it. And their dietary adherence goes off the deal.
Yeah.
Left unchecked,
Mm.
that person is probably going to die prematurely, and it's
Okay.
going to be a low quality of life. So you
Okay.
go, okay, let's go hire a trainer. Let's allow for 3 months. Get someone that is going to get leverage on you. Let's go 3 months of regular exercise and regular diet and see how far I can get.
Right.
Sometimes
Okay.
that's sufficient enough to get over the hump. Give yourself 90 to 180 days under expert guidance, not your own. Because if you haven't figured it out by that time, you're not going to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just not. Like, just stop kidding
Yeah.
yourself.
For
Right? That's the
sure.
first rule of law. Thou shalt stop kidding yourself.
Yeah.
You know, get the
I love
expert help so you have the motivation and someone to guide you through those obstacles and that you're executing, and be disciplined on that and see where you're getting.
Okay.
Okay, with that, you'll probably lose in let's say in 90 days, you'll probably lose 10 to 12 pounds and feel a little better and probably have a little better hormone profile. But that may not be enough of what you want. So you're like, screw it.
Yeah.
Let's get a qualified bioidentical hormone doctor, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
get on, you know, let's say TRT.
Yeah.
And I can say to this because I've got a lot of friends in that whole world, right?
Sure.
So
Sure. Sure.
I'm telling you essentially a story without naming names.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so the guy goes on TRT. He goes from a 250 testosterone level to 1,000 or 800 to 1,200 depending.
Right.
And those first 12 weeks, he is going to feel like a god. Period. The
Yeah.
euphoria of using exogenous testosterone is psychologically and psychophysiologically extremely powerful for men. And
Okay.
any guy who's gone through that will tell you that for sure. Their
Okay.
attitude changes, their brain chemistry changes, their capacity to focus, their level of intensity, drive, their confidence, the
Yeah.
pheromones they're producing totally transforms. So all of a sudden, he's looking good, he's feeling good, he's
Good.
killing it. His wife is impressed. He's getting
Yeah.
sex again.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
on top of the world,
World. Yeah.
right? And I'm going to say to that guy, well, now what are you going to do for your longevity perspective? Yeah, here's a gun. I'm going to shoot you, Wade, because
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
to hear about it.
Yeah. La 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 la.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
care.
And I get it, right? Now,
Yeah.
I want to separate two things for the listener. Hormone replacement therapy is different than using anabolic steroids, although you may be using an anabolic testosterone nature that's suited for you, right? A testosterone replacement therapy. You're trying
Yeah.
to get to optimal levels of testosterone, not super physiological that you would see with professional bodybuilding, untested
Right.
professional
Right.
bodybuilders. Okay, so we need to separate those two things. And I would say the most men over the age of 40, if they don't have all the other things worked out, it's probably a good angle for them, both from longevity and for the quality of life. And
Okay.
then as long as they maintain the guidance under the tutelage of a professional that they're seeing
Mhm.
regularly, that this is not a one and done solution, that there are
Yes.
some complications that could occur over a long period of time. Number one, it's going to probably disrupt their sperm count if they're trying to have
Mhm.
children.
Mhm.
People are having kids a lot later.
Yep.
So like, for example, I would like to have kids and I would probably
Okay.
benefit from TRT. So I'm not doing TRT because I want to have kids.
Got you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that choice, the desire to have
Yeah.
choice, is in contraindication for it being at my best. You put me on TRT, I'm probably going to gain another 10 pounds of muscle. I'm probably going to drop like 10 pounds of body. I'll be ripped, shredded
Yeah.
in 12 weeks and look amazing and feel
Yeah.
better. And I like that, but it would not give me my goal of that.
Right. Right. Right.
So these are the trade-offs that we all have to deal with.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
understand that there's trade-offs. Get professionals in your camp. I call it assembling your Jedi Council that are
Yeah.
giving you
Right.
insight and that you're monitoring things regularly so that if any disruptions in that, you know that you can make that course because it's your body's not static, your life's not static, and your hormones accelerate everything in the process. The reason your body loses hormones
Mm-hmm.
starts deregulating hormones is
Yep.
so that you don't accelerate the growth of negative consequences, cancers, cysts in the body,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
dysregulatory aspects that are suboptimal for your health and vitality. You don't, so hormones like turbocharge your exhaustion of things. So
No.
I look
Yeah.
at it as like, I want to get my diet on point. I want to get my exercise on point. I want to get the elements that are suboptimal in my genetics accounted for before I go to hormone therapy.
Right.
Dial all those things in. So when I do go to hormone therapy, I get
Mm.
all of the benefits with very little side effects. I'm not
Okay.
using it as a replacement for the gaping holes in my lifestyle.
Mm. And what would happen, like, for example, because I know a lot of people who go on, hormone therapy, they will drop a lot of weight. Their body fat percentage goes down. And so, what are some of the implications of carrying, like, for example, for a man, if he's like walking around at 5% body fat all year round, or for a woman who's, say, walking around with like 12% or something like that? What are the implications of that?
Well, they're huge. So first off, I believe that based on your genetic predisposition will determine
Mm.
how ripped you can be without
Got
having
you.
health complications.
Okay.
So an endomorphic person would probably, for a male, be on the upper end, like maybe 10 to 12% as would be
Hmm.
their leanness on. This was going by a DEXA standard, which is a little bit
Hmm.
higher than what you do on calipers or something else. And for an ectomorph, someone who's naturally lean, you'd probably be somewhere around 8%. And that's a big difference
Okay.
visually for people.
Yeah,
Just so that, like that
sure.
4% is a lot. That's where you're seeing the difference between like striated quads and triceps
Yeah.
versus, having a nice abs, but not really super defined. And
Yeah, right.
that's the variance. And
Okay.
then you're going to be able to see that show up in your hormone checks or your risk factors that your doctor should be able to assess. And that's
Yes.
it's more of a problem for females than men
Okay.
because men are run on a 24-hour cycle and women run on a 28 to 35 day cycle depending on their
Right.
cycle. And so their hormone cycle varies a lot more than a man's does
Sure.
on a month to month basis. And so
Okay.
you really need someone nuanced, particularly. And of course, all my female bodybuilding types or fitness competitor
Yeah.
types, they all will tell you as soon as they go below a certain body fat percentage, they lose their ability to menstruate. That means they're
Yeah.
not able to have children.
Yeah.
And depending if they're not using exogenous hormones, they probably have a low sex drive. If they are
Mm.
using exogenous, particularly anabolics and things like that,
Yeah.
oftentimes they'll have an excessive sex drive, and then that can
Sure.
change. That can change voice, and it can change. They could start masculizing features, enlargement of the clitoris, and things like that. So
Right.
there are serious consequences that are often
Okay.
irreversible for women who are going down that route that they don't deal with. And also the use of thyroid medication, which is quite
Mm.
common amongst fitness competitors and people
Yes.
trying to get ripped. I would really caution against that. I would look for, if you have thyroid issues, I would really start looking into iodine supplementation or T2.
Yeah.
So you'll hear about T3, T4. You can read L. Russ's books on the thyroid
Yeah.
solution, paleothyroid solution, and I think that will provide some insight about weight management, particularly for women, because the disruptive components in our life, high estrogens and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. One thing too that I got that I absolutely love that you also said on the Dave, I'm not throwing Dave under the bus in any way, but there was some golden nuggets in there that I really liked. And one of the things that you said that I was trying to put words to this, you said that we have to abandon the idea of the caveman when it comes to, because it's so like everywhere now. It's like, what would the cavemen have done? What would, if we look back into our ancestors, and it always seems to circle back around to almost all dietary platforms to this caveman idea. And
Yeah.
I'd never heard it say like that, that we
Yeah.
really need to abandon that. Can you just like expand
Yeah.
on that a little bit? Because
Well,
I love that.
first off, if we had a caveman and he
Yeah.
walked into a 7-Eleven, he'd club the attendant and he would go
Yeah.
absolutely bananas on all the sugar and enter into an insulin coma and die.
Yeah.
That's what would happen.
Yeah.
Because the reason that we like all this refined sugars and stuff, because it hits all of the high point elements that we inherited from our caveman genetics. Like, duh. And we're not cavemen.
Yes.
We have carryovers from those genetic, the 10,000 generations before us. So we want to honor that. And that's embedded into our DNA and our response mechanisms, et cetera. And some of those are great and some of those are suboptimal. So this whole, and then the other thing and then a lot of this emerged from the paleo description. So, well, let's go pre-caveman. Let's go back to our ancestors that were more like chimpanzees. The reason that we developed colored sight was so that we could tell the difference between ripe fruit and non-ripe fruit. And the reason that we could identify for movement, particularly in males, is to identify snakes in the trees that would have killed us. Right. Okay. So, and there is a reaction around snakes with people that is far in excess to other predators that is legitimately real. And so these are just genetic biases that it's carried by this. The other thing is, if I'm a caveman in Northern Europe versus a caveman in the savannas, first off, I don't live in the cave in the savannas. There's probably not a cave there. Or I'm living as a caveman or a tribal group in the Amazon. All of those environments are radically different. And my diet is going to be radically different. And most cave people didn't live more than 40 years old. You died.
Yes, exactly.
So all of so what might be optimal genetics to survive in a very uncertain and challenging environment as a caveman may not be optimal for living to be 100 years old. Yes. So the thing about genetics that's hard for us to calibrate is what we see suboptimal in this slice of time may be the most important gene to carry through 1,000 years from now in our ancestors to come. But we're caught in this sliver of time in our own lives. We're so self-important that we're not recognizing that in evolutionary biology, there's 3 primary drives. I call it, the feed, the fight, and we'll call it fornicate so that we don't say, right? So what does that mean? All single cell organisms to multi-cell organisms, right up to the sophistication human, they need an outside energy source. So they have ways of getting energy. Okay. Number 2, they have defense mechanisms, whether that's from predators or bacteria or parasites, you have defense. So there's offense to go get the food. There's defense to protect us from someone else eating us or killing us so that we can live long enough to procreate, which is the other strong drive that allows us to transport our genes through time. That's the evolutionary bias that's built within all of us. And that's why I always call it the 80s power ballad. I grew up in the 80s and, singing about love and connection and all that sort of stuff. It's to create that internal biological longing to have a partner and to replicate and, create the next generation. So we just got to abandon these. Yeah. They're nice, cool talking points, and they create, what appears to be valid arguments. But if you actually dissect them,
No,
With the
they don't hold
scalpel of
any weight.
reason, they fall apart relatively
They
quick.
fall apart. Yeah. And I just wanted to bring that up because it seems to be just, I mean, it's just circling, round and around. And anywhere you go, it just keeps coming back to this idea. So when I heard you say that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is just such a brilliant thing I just heard. I had to, I just needed you to just kind of run with that a little bit because I think it's really important to just abandon that idea. Another thing, lastly, I mean, there's so many things that we could discuss about this book. It is a Bible, but I wanted to just address, lastly, the traumas and the wounding piece and eating, not addressing those parts of our lives. And it seems to be a lot of people, they don't want to go there for oftentimes valid reasons. It's very painful. They don't want to stir up the past, but what are the implications of that, of not really truly fully understanding what your traumas have been or your woundings in the past, as far as that shows up in our dietary choices and what the consequences of that could be?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a great book called The Body Keeps Its Score.
Mm-hmm.
And it says the average healthy person has somewhere between 200 to 500 micro traumas. Someone
Yeah.
who's high on an ACEs score might have as many as a couple of thousand. And
Mm-hmm.
these traumas are our perceptual conclusion of a series of events that happened into the past that we made a judgment call. And that judgment call led us to behave in certain ways. So you were
Yeah.
told you were fat or ugly when you were 6 years old and you didn't have the coping mechanism to it. And that made you believe that or whatever. And then you go off and eat sugar and candy. Or
Right.
when you were a good person, you were given a cookie. And when you were a bad person, you were hungry. And so you create these reward response mechanisms of how you represent. These are traumas that lead to decision making trees inside your
Mm-hmm.
brain that make sense, but seem to be compelled by something that you can't seem to control. So when you have a series, let's say you're trying to adhere to a diet or a philosophy or lose weight or whatever, and nothing seems to work,
Yeah.
oftentimes by going to, say, a qualified EFT practitioner or getting a
Yeah.
good psychological assessment, you can identify these. And we put it forth a thing called tapping is a great thing about
Yeah.
where you're using tapping on your body with these things. And it sounds like super weird, but it actually works. And that you can reframe these traumatic belief systems. A trauma isn't the actual problem, it's what you've determined as an unconscious belief from the trauma, how you
Right. Yeah.
represented the trauma. And because of that, you get into these kind of operational biases that you can't seem to get out of and you don't know why. So when a person says, "Oh, I've tried everything and it's not working and I don't know what's going on and nobody can figure me out," guaranteed there's a bunch of unresolved traumas that are locking you into a set of suboptimal behaviors that you can't see
Yeah.
out of because your brain doesn't want to have that disrupted. And so
Mm-hmm.
by identifying that and recognizing that and getting an expert to help you with that and learning things like emotional freedom technique, you're able to overcome many
Yeah.
of these conditioning programs, these family conditioning programs that you can get rid of. And both Matt and I have done that extensively. We've done a lot of work on this, the removal of resentments from the past,
Mm-hmm.
because resentments from past trauma can also be debilitating and have huge effects on our health and vitality and our
Yeah.
ability to achieve our goals. All of this is psychological, emotional baggage that you're carrying, and everybody has
Yeah.
it. Nobody's excluded from it. We're
Yeah.
all, we all have these things. And by identifying and owning those things, you can really make rapid. I've seen people just take emotional freedom techniques
Yeah.
in combination with good dietary practice and some coaching. I've seen people get off prescription antidepressants that they've been on for more than
Yeah.
3 decades. I've seen people lose in excess of 100 pounds of weight.
Yeah.
I've seen people transform their relationship with themselves and their partners or their
Mm-hmm.
prospective partners radically by addressing these issues. So we put that in the book as a section because we felt that there's so many people in our experience that are inhibited by these things, and the dietary solutions aren't going to work, and the exercise
Work for
solutions
them.
aren't going to work, and the hormone solutions are going to not work.
Yes.
And so we wanted
So,
to include
so,
that.
so with the emotional piece, then you would say that it's just really a way to numb out, using food as a way to numb out from actually facing the past traumas. And so that's creating,
Yeah.
obviously if someone is like overweight by, yeah.
I'm one of those people. So I'll give you an
Okay.
example of how to use it,
Mhm.
or what I have to be mindful of. So there's
Yeah.
two anchoring points for me. So one of the reasons people consume simple carbohydrates like sugars and refined flours and things like that, which I love all that stuff, just so you know,
Yes.
is because your ability to produce serotonin is 95% in the gut, and you can convert that stuff into serotonin relatively quickly.
Okay.
So when I'm emotionally dysregulated, something happened in my personal life that I'm feeling bad about or not going.
Hmm.
And so my neurochemistry is depressed, not like say I'm in depression, but it's depressed. I
Yeah.
don't have a
Yes.
significant
Yes.
amount of serotonin. I can feel better by turning on a TV show
Mm.
and mindlessly consuming a bunch of serotonin production
Right.
carbohydrates.
Right.
Now, here's another thing. I like to watch the UFC on Saturday nights when
Okay.
they have that UFC, and it's overt violence and testosterone and
Yeah.
cortisol going. And I'm here with my friends, and I'm screaming and yelling at the TV and cheering my guys on, or going
Yeah. Yeah.
mad or excitement. And my calorie consumption during that time goes through the roof because of the high cortisol, high anxiety. So if you look at high anxiety situations and cortisol productions, one of the way of mitigating that is through food consumption or sexual expression. So,
Okay.
for example, why is there high lots of rapes in war zones and whatever? Because the threat to the individual activates the
Mm.
threat, violence, and sexual turning on problem. People also in the sadist
Oh,
masochist thing.
interesting.
These
Yeah.
centers get kind of cross activated. So the threat to their lives of shooting people and killing people, and then rapes tends to happen after that because of
Wow.
the animal nature, and the threat detection is because those genes need to be passed on through time.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so
Right.
the person, that's an extreme case that I'm
Mm.
leveraging of why those things happen. I'm not condoning it or saying that it's
Of
right, but
course.
if you
Yeah.
understand the physiological and psychological mechanisms of why we do this, and that's why you're eating too many chips, watching your favorite, love
Yes.
story at night after you had a fight with your boyfriend, or because you had, my lady
Got you.
made me upset, and I kind of sit and watch a great movie and feel better about
Yeah.
myself. And then
Yeah. Feel
afterwards, I'm going
better.
to wake
Yeah.
up and go, oh my God, I ate 3,000 extra calories, and I woke up all
Calories.
bloated and stuff the next
Yeah.
day. So it is all human, and it's okay. And so we try to help people identify all those things and remove the obstacles to what's holding them back from getting their best self.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I love that, because a lot of, a lot of the diet books that are out there that are focusing on a diet are not going to address that piece. It's like you have to go into a book like The Body Keeps the Score, for example. You're looking at that, but you're really tying it all in together as one, which is beautiful and amazing. So I asked you my kind of standard question last time. So I'm going to ask you another ending question today, which
Sure.
is, you kind of touched on it at the beginning, but what good do you hope that your work is going to do for the people at large? Your
Yeah.
work that you're putting out right now?
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
My intention behind everything I do is to remove human suffering
Mm.
and allow them to live and activate what we call awesome health. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, the maximum amount of vitality, joy, happiness, and functionality as they go through life, and
Okay.
potentially extend life. And I would say that there's society and cognitive obstacles to that
Mm-hmm.
that the individual doesn't know, that are not being spoken about, that
Okay.
they don't understand. And I've walked through those valleys, and I
Mm.
found solutions. And like any good explorer, you want to bring that back to your human tribe to share with them and say, hey,
Yeah.
look, here's some things that we discovered. We don't know everything, but we found out this, and we found out this, and we found out this. And we want to compile as many of those things as possible. So when people see the book, they go, oh, that's a big book. Yeah, you're not there to read the whole book. You're there
Right.
to just go through the table of contents and say, oh, what's that about? And read that chapter and then apply that chapter, because that chapter might be the chapter that changes the whole
Right.
paradigm of your life. And that's our hope, that we can help change people's lives and help people who have struggled for often their whole life to say, you know what, your effort is not without vain. You just need a couple of tweaks and you can get your goals can be achieved. And and if we get those, and we are getting those, and it's really rewarding, because I'm fascinated by one element of the human condition, and is that every time that you do something good for other people, there is a biochemical response inside of ourselves that feels good as well.
Absolutely.
So that tells me that we're far more connected to everybody than we might have imagined. And that's representation in this response mechanism. So I want to do as much of that good as I possibly can, because when I hear these testimonials and I see that we had like this big party yesterday here at my house with like 200 and some people of all in the industry, and we're all celebrating it. It was a bad thing that happened, and we made something good out of it. And I just saw how people were exchanging and sharing and feeling good and doing that. And I love that. And I think that's a great way to live one's life. I think it makes for a life well lived.
Beautiful. That is beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. And I'm going to put all the links in the show notes to the website, the Instagram, the affiliate, the discount that people can get for the products. And yeah, I'll link that all in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me again. This is amazing. And yeah, so grateful.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much as well.